Veronica says, just walked Brooklyn Hill, stacks of bikes, seems fine. That's all we've got time for this afternoon. We're coming up to the news at 5. Nikki Bazant, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon.
Been a pleasure.
And Eli Matthewson, enjoy your weekend and your dinner, Eli.
Yeah, well, take some photos. I'll let you know how it goes.
Yeah, take some photos. And don't forget to put your clocks forward an hour tomorrow night. Daylight saving starts on tomorrow night. Thanks, everyone. News is next, back on Monday.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Heidi Akine, the unwelcome guest in Auckland CBD, calls to reserve managed isolation facilities deep in the super city for lower risk returnees only. Meanwhile, the continuing squeeze on MIQ forces a Waikato company to send some staff offshore indefinitely. And a warning for Auckland's first weekend at level 3. Keep your distance, you're not free yet. A man appears in court charged with the murder of a woman with Down syndrome as the tiny town of Tarras taxiing closer to an international airport. And run, Nick, run, the mad professor jogging around Wellington streets for 24 hours straight to raise awareness of respiratory disease. That's going to cost a few toenails.
Ahi Mari e, RNZ News at 5, ko Sarah Thompson tōku ingoa. The man charged with murdering and sexually violating a young woman in Auckland this week has entered no plea and will remain in custody. Lena Zhang Harap was found dead among trees near Owairaka, Mount Albert on Wednesday afternoon after failing to return from her regular morning walk. Jordan Bond reports.
A 31-year-old man was arrested in the early hours of this morning, sitting in his car in Papatoetoe, 20 kilometres away. He was granted interim name suppression in the Auckland District Court this afternoon before Judge Peter Winter. The case will be moved to the High Court at Auckland, where the man will reappear on October the 13th. In a statement today, the 27-year-old's family said they were eternally grateful for the outpouring of support they'd received. They directed any donations to 2 charities, Heart Kids and Star Jam.
The number of new COVID-19 cases in the community has dropped to a single figure for the first time in weeks. There are just 9 new cases, all in Tāmaki Makaurau and all linked to earlier cases. There's also a new case and a recent returnee in managed isolation. The Deputy Prime Minister, Grant Robertson, says the numbers are encouraging.
What we do know is that there are still isolated cases, but we do feel we are getting on top of this outbreak. And it's the reason why I said we've just got to stick at it. Having come so far here, this is why we need Aucklanders to make sure they stick to the Alert Level 3 rules so that we can get those cases down even further.
Upper Hauraki will drop down to Alert Level 2 from 11:59pm on Saturday, with no more cases identified in the region. Auckland's mayor is encouraging Aucklanders to keep following the COVID lockdown rules as the city enters its first weekend of the latest lockdown in Level 3. Phil Goff says it was encouraging that today's COVID numbers were in single digits, but he says people need to remember COVID is still in the community and the city needs to remain vigilant. Mr Goff is urging residents to follow the rules of Level 3, stay local and stay within bubbles. He's also encouraging people to get vaccinated this weekend if possible. And in news just to hand, the search for a King Country family missing for 12 days has been suspended. 34-year-old Thomas Phillips and his children aged between 5 and 8 were last seen on September 11th. A group of Tarras residents still have serious concerns about any proposed airport in the town. An investigation by Christchurch Airport has found the Central Otago settlement can support a runway of at least 2.2 kilometres, long enough to cater for international flights. The company has bought 750 hectares of farmland there in the hope of one day building an international airport. Sustainable Tarras Chair Chris Goddard says he wants more details.
The proposal remains silent on the business case. It doesn't say where the tourists are coming from, whether they're replacing the Queenstown and Wanaka airports, moving traffic from Christchurch, or leaning in heavily to bulk tourism.
Chris Goddard says Sustainable Tarras is gauging local opinion at present. A volcanologist says adventure operators will need more tools to help them assess risks from natural hazards if the government goes ahead with its proposed changes to regulations. Consultation is getting underway on tougher rules for adventure activities in response to the 2019 Whakaari eruption. They include requirements on both operators and landowners around the assessment of risks from things like rock falls, water surges, flooding, eruptions and avalanches. University of Auckland Professor of Volcanology Shane Cronin says that's good, but there's a piece of the puzzle missing.
It's not really easy to do this. There actually needs to be quite a lot more effort that goes into developing some acceptable tools for risk evaluation.
Cabinet will consider any changes early next year. The Asthma and Respiratory Foundation hopes a 24-hour marathon runner will help people understand the seriousness of these diseases. Victoria University of Wellington Professor Nick Ashall is running 24 hours non-stop across the city to raise awareness for respiratory diseases. He'll finish his run tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. You can hear from Nick himself on how he's going later on Checkpoint. Moving now into sports news, the Silver Ferns are already on the back foot ahead of the decider against the England Roses in Christchurch tonight. Bridget Tunnicliffe reports from Otautahi.
The Silver Ferns will be without their captain and vice-captain for the third and final test. Captain Gina Crampton has an adductor strain which kept her out of the second test, while vice-captain Sulu Fitzpatrick hyperextended her knee during training. Shooter Tiana Maturo is also not available following a strain she picked up in the second test. Sam Winders will stand in as captain. Development squad members Kimiora Poi and Georgia Tong have been brought into the side. Grace Weke and Peter Tuiava will also get another opportunity tonight.
The All Blacks captain, Ardie Savea, says Waka Nathan was one of the great All Blacks. Nathan, who also played for the Māori All Blacks, has died. He was 81. The loose forward featured in the 1966 series victory over the British and Irish Lions, scoring 2 tries in the third test. Savea says he never met Nathan, but he would have liked to.
He was a great All Black. I think he was undefeated and never lost a test match, and he was known as the Black Panther. That was his nickname. So, when someone's part of the All Black team, they're a member of the family.
And finally, New Zealand tennis players Erin Routliffe and Artem Sitak are through to the semi-finals of their respective doubles tournaments. Routliffe and American Caitlin Christian are through to the final 4 of the WTA tournament in the Czech Republic. Sitak and Ricardo Berankis of Lithuania are into the semis of the ATP tournament in Kazakhstan. And that's the news.
Tomorrow morning, Yanis Varoufakis was Greek finance minister in 2015, briefly, but with much celebrity. He imagines an alternative to capitalism. No commercial banks, no stock market, no IMF. Diane Modestini explains why she was convinced of the authenticity of the controversial Lost Leonardo. And New Zealand conservationist Annette Lees has written a beautiful book about the night. Ko Kim Hillaho, join me tomorrow morning from 8 on RNZ National.
Te reo irirangi o Aotearoa, funded through New Zealand On Air. Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Aotearoa Saturday. Northland to Manawatu, including Coromandel and the Central High Country. Fine and cloudy periods, rain about Taranaki tomorrow night. Bay of Plenty and Gisborne to Wairarapa, all fine. Horowhenua to Wellington, also Nelson and Marlborough, fine tonight, cloud increasing tomorrow with evening rain. Canterbury, except for the High Country, and North Otago and Dunedin will be fine tonight, scattered showers tomorrow with severe nor'west gales in exposed places. Bulla, Westland, Fiordland and the Canterbury High Country will see scattered showers, turning to rain in Fiordland this evening and elsewhere tomorrow. Heavy with possible thunderstorms, easing tomorrow evening. Severe nor'west gales about the High Country tomorrow. Southland, Clutha and Central Otago will see fine spells and isolated showers tonight. Rain tomorrow with severe nor'west gales in exposed places. Rain turning to showers tomorrow afternoon with wind easing. And for the Chatham Islands, fine spells with drizzle developing tomorrow afternoon. That concludes the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Aotearoa Saturday. It's 8 minutes past 5.
Nā mihi Sarah, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Some of the country's most prominent COVID minds are calling on the government to radically rethink the MIQ setup in Auckland. The current outbreak, which has seen Auckland locked down for 5.5 weeks and counting, is believed to have leaked out of managed isolation in the middle of the CBD. The link hasn't been nailed down, but health officials believe Delta escaped into the community through a traveller from New South Wales who checked into MIQ at the Crown Plaza. Two epidemiologists say the Auckland beds need to be reserved for those arriving from the most low-risk locations. Nick Trubridge reports.
It's time for MIQ to pack up and leave town. Auckland Mayor Phil Goff saying he wants isolation hotels out of his downtown for good.
Look, it may have made sense at the start of COVID-19 as an initial response, and I know they've worked hard to improve the security of those facilities, but notwithstanding their very best efforts, the virus has, on a couple of occasions at least, escaped into the community with pretty devastating consequences.
Of the country's 31 MIQ facilities, 9 are smack bang in the middle of our biggest city. The Mayor says he's made his concerns known to the government. He wants to see purpose-built facilities, perhaps on city fringe or surplus land close to Auckland Airport, areas where COVID's less able to escape, but still close to staffing and medical facilities. While he's been told the government's open to other options, Mr Goff says more needs to be done, and quickly.
But I'm not sure that they've taken that far enough down the track yet. And I've written quite recently to the Minister for COVID-19, just urging them to do that work and asking where they've got to in terms of the creation of a longer-term and purpose-built facilities, which I think we have to move to at this stage, rather than relying on hotels that weren't designed for the purpose for which they're now being used.
And it's not just Aucklanders and New Zealanders' health at stake. Mr Goff says downtown MIQ facilities are having another negative effect on Auckland's once bustling CBD.
And that concern is now also around the perception of Auckland, from people around New Zealand, and at some time in the future when we open up from around the world, that Auckland's not a safe place to visit, and that's damaging us economically as well.
Otago University professors Michael Baker and Nick Wilson have been mulling over the MIQ issue for months now. Professor Wilson says if Auckland's to eliminate this current outbreak, Auckland's MIQ facilities should be reserved for double vaccinated arrivals or those from low-risk locations like the Pacific, Tasmania and Western Australia. Professor Baker says there needs to be changes in where high-risk returnees are placed, including those who are infectious.
Now, they need to be looked after in a far more secure environment. And it seems that if we look at the experience in the Jet Park Hotel in Auckland, which is where infected people go, there has been documented transmission in that environment.
But he says it's not all about bricks and mortar, saying a systematic approach needs to be taken from before returnees even step foot on a plane. The key is keeping COVID out in the first place.
At the moment, we've put a huge weight on this PCR test in the previous 72 hours. But in addition, we could look at a rapid antigen test.
The professors have looked at the pros and cons of building a dedicated quarantine facility on a military base, such as Ohakia. Professor Wilson says the cost, even if a few tens of millions, are trivial compared to the cost of repeated outbreaks from MIQ failures. Professor Baker, meanwhile, says there's another very important reason to explore new isolation and quarantine arrangements. Delta may soon be superseded.
There may also be more dangerous variants that are going to emerge in the future. There's a lot of work going into thinking about the likelihood of these other variants. So that's why I think we should also invest in, dedicated facilities.
MIQ Associate Deputy Secretary Andrew Milne told Checkpoint the contracts are up for MIQ next June, and there's the opportunity to renew by mutual agreement for another year. He says hotels in current locations are the only facilities that could be commissioned to MIQ standard in a short time frame. Mr Milne says moving them isn't exactly easy. Complex issues need to be considered, such as workforce, suitability of hotels and proximity to hospitals and transport. He says MIQ officials are exploring what medium to long-term MIQ options might support the response to the pandemic. A decision on any move to purpose-built MIQ would have to be made by Cabinet.
Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback. Nō reira anei na kaupapa mō te hōtaka nei. What do you reckon? Only low-risk travellers allowed in the downtown MIQ facilities, and should we invest in purpose-built? Pātui mai, text me 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can flick us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is 14 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Kia ora watu mō te whakarongo mai, e haere nei, coming up, Aucklanders are warned to keep their distance during the city's first weekend at level 3. And Auckland has cracked a vaccination milestone. 81% of the eligible population has had one dose of Pfizer. And there's the push this weekend to get even more jabbed. The carrot is a possible alert level shift when Cabinet meets on October the 4th, with Te Piramia, Jacinda Ardern, hinting the chances could be better if the super city hits 90% with a single dose of Pfizer. But Māori and Pacifica are way behind. Ko taku manuhiri in INA, ko Dr. Anthony Jordan from the Northern Regional Health Coordination Centre Vaccination Programme. Kia ora, Anthony.
Tēnā koe, Lisa.
So 81% for Auckland announced today, but what's the comparison? How are Māori and Pacifica doing?
Well, we know that their uptake is not as good, and so that's part of the problem with just using averages. Actually, for us, it's about making sure that everyone receives that high level of protection. So nationally, our first dose for Māori is about just over 300,000, and for Pacifica approaching 200,000. So still more work to do there for us.
But as a percentage, can you give us a comparison for Auckland? Because we've just been told today, across the board in Auckland, 81% vaccinated. But what does that percentage look like right now for Pacifica and Māori?
So our numbers are calculated every evening, so we just need to wait until those numbers are finished. A number of our sites are still open, so our percentage increase will be worked out hopefully by this evening, and those numbers will be with you in the morning.
Okay, so from the numbers that were available, the last set of numbers were available on a Sunday, I think it was. The latest one's up on the vaccination dashboard from the Ministry of Health. Counties Manukau is one of the worst areas, with only 50% of Māori having the first dose versus 84% of non-Māori. Have we had all the low-hanging fruit here in terms of getting people to come forward and get vaccinated? And are we now in the bit that is a real grind?
I don't think so. I think we've still got a lot of accessibility work to increase those vaccination rates. So we're working with our Māori and Pacifica partners to ensure that we're getting out into those communities with their trusted providers to make sure that they're both getting the information that they need to get vaccinated, and to ensure that it's a program of work that ensures they come back for a second dose as well.
So when you say making sure that they've got the information, do you think that in the groups that are lagging behind, do they know about the vaccination program? Do they know where to get the dose from? Do they have all that information? And is it then about, not wanting it?
I don't think so. I think it's about connection. I think it's about kanohi ki te kanohi, having that discussion with people, knowing the people that are talking to you, your trusted providers. I think highline messaging is important to make it aware, but actually a lot of these people are searching for information from their trusted providers.
So do you need to go door to door then? With vaccinations, not just with information. So you've got the buses, right?
Yeah.
Do you need to pull up into a street, roll out, knock on the door, have the face-to-face conversation, and then say, hey, the bus is here, let's step over and get the jab?
I think that's where I would like to see the program moving towards. Obviously, with alert levels and the risk of community transmission, obviously that's hampered us a little bit to be able to do that, but that's definitely the direction we would like to see the program moving.
So when can you do that? Only when you get to level 2?
Well, we've started some things already. So this week on Wednesday, we started home visiting for those people who can't leave their homes. So there are things that we're able to do even at level 3. It's much more convenient at level 2 in terms of being able to get communities out to be able to vaccinate them, and also just that risk of mixing bubbles. Obviously, alert level 3 has hampered us as well.
So when we talk about going door to door, will you do that? With the buses or in some other way?
Yeah, in some other way. Buses are great because they sort of are mobile for us in terms of being able to take all the equipment we want with us. But, not every street can fit a bus down it, so we just need to look at other options.
In terms of those buses, how many have you got on the road now?
At the end of this week, we had 9 buses commissioned. So they were all working and they were handed over. You probably saw the handover this morning to some of our Pacifica providers. So we'll see those buses going out on a sort of an agenda over the next 7 days. So hopefully people will see where they're coming to.
So there are 9 buses that right now are giving out vaccines?
Yep.
And how many did they deliver this week?
We're crunching those numbers to look at how many were delivered. On average, a bus is probably delivering about 70 to 150, depending on where they go to.
For the week or per day?
Per day, sorry. That should be.
Okay. So the thing is that the Prime Minister, well, she's kind of dangled a carrot, right? The alert level consideration is on October the 4th, and she's indicating that, well, things could look a bit better for the super city if we hit 90% of people with a single dose. But she's also put a rider on that she wants all ethnicities to reach that. So can you do it for Pacifica and Māori in about the week and a half you've got left until October the 4th?
We'll definitely give it a good go. I think we just need to look at those numbers to see what uptake we've had over the last week. I can tell you over the last sort of 4 weeks, we've seen dramatic increase in the rates of Māori and Pacific getting vaccinated. So as long as we can maintain those and get to those hard-to-reach groups that have possibly not necessarily had the opportunity to be vaccinated, we're always hopeful that we'll be able to get there.
Do you set yourself a target? Have you got a weekly target laid out in order to get to that 90%?
The target is difficult because I think the target assumes that means everyone gets protected. So we don't work on the averages. We work on making sure that we reach everyone who wants to be vaccinated as they're coming forward. So at the moment, we don't have a specific time frame in which we can get to that number, no.
Appreciate your time this evening. That's Dr. Anthony Jordan, who's from the Northern Regional Health Coordination Centre Vaccination Program. The man accused of murdering and sexually violating a woman with Down syndrome on her morning walk in clear daylight appeared in court today, entering no plea and keeping his name secret. 27-year-old Lena Zhang Harip went missing on her Wednesday morning walk in the Auckland suburb of Mount Albert, and her body was found among trees that afternoon. Early this morning, a 31-year-old was arrested and charged with her murder. Her family today released a statement saying they are eternally grateful for the outpouring of support. John Bond reports.
Locals today visited Wairaka, a maunga Lena was so fond of, to lay flowers and pay their respects.
When we sit on our deck, we actually look at Mount Albert and we, just look out here now and think of her all the time, and it's just such a tragedy.
Lena regularly took morning walks around her neighbourhood. Locals said she was well known around here, always greeting people with a big smile. Several people were visibly upset as they stood at the police cordon on Summit Drive. Josh was one of them.
It's upset me more than anything this year, actually. The young girl, she obviously, was a happy girl from the photos you saw, and she hadn't led an independent life, and it's just so sad. I'm just so sad for the family.
Today, the 31-year-old man police allege was responsible for her death and sexual violation appeared in the Auckland District Court. He appeared briefly from prison. He will stay there, entering no plea but being granted interim name suppression. He will reappear in the High Court next month. The New Zealand Down Syndrome Association says their network has rallied together and provided each other support. Spokesperson Zandra Vaccarino says it is devastating.
Well, I think we're all in shock. we're all feeling heartbroken, and I think an element of real outrage at the situation.
Ms Vacarino says while some are asking questions now that they weren't earlier this week, they're not going to stop doing what they love.
We want to be able to have our independence and dignity, and for people with Down syndrome and their families, that's what they want. They want to be participating in the community, and they want to be involved, and they want to do the things that they've done, and families are saying that that's what they want to continue to do.
In a statement today, Lena's family said they were eternally grateful for the outpouring of support they'd received. They said she had received friendship, joy and acceptance through 2 charities, Heart Kids and Star Jam. The family asked people to direct their love, their aroha, by way of support to these charities so that others may continue to benefit.
It is 23 minutes past 5. Kia mau tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Police have issued a warning to Aucklanders ahead of the weekend. Level 3 is not level 3. As the city faces its first weekend with slightly looser restrictions, police are reminding those in Tamaki Makaurau, don't be tempted to burst your bubble. This comes after multiple arrests were made at border checkpoints yesterday. Let's get more on this now from our reporter Louise Tenuth, who joins us live from Auckland's Mission Bay. Well, Lou, the weekend's already started for some, so how busy is it where you are and how's it looking out there?
Well, Lisa, there are plenty of people out and about here at Mission Bay. As you can see behind me, it is extremely busy. Now, a lot of people are exercising, but due to the sheer numbers around, it's making it really hard to keep that 2 metre social distancing between people, and there's not a lot of mask wearing happening either. Now, we've seen people sitting down here at the beach or on the park benches. Some of them are using gym equipment to do workouts, and many people have actually brought their Friday night takeaways down to the beach. And they're doing this in groups of large numbers of people of quite similar ages, actually, to be honest. So there are some interesting bubbles around. Now, the weather forecast for the weekend is set to be sunny for Aucklanders, and we do have daylight savings happening on Sunday. But police are urging them not to let their standards slip and to stick to those bubbles. This is not the time to have any slip-ups for the first weekend of level 3. And they will be upping their surveillance over the weekend to make sure that people are following those rules. And Auckland Council is echoing those instructions. Here's what Mayor Phil Goff has to say.
Well, the message is that we were all hugely relieved to get back to level 3, but that doesn't change the reality that COVID-19 and the Delta variant, which is highly contagious, is still out there in the community. We're not out of the woods yet. We can't let our guard down. We need to continue to follow the rules, and I urge people to do that. And most importantly, I urge people that haven't yet been vaccinated. There's over 200,000 eligible people in Auckland still not vaccinated, to get out and do it to protect themselves, their family and their community.
So, Louise, police say, wow, there's been a few people trying to blag their way through the border checkpoints, yeah?
Yeah, yesterday 22,000 vehicles were processed through those checkpoints and around 457 of them were turned away. There was also a few arrests. There was an arrest after a 63-year-old man tried to get through one of those checkpoints and he refused to provide any of his details, and another at the Rawiri Road checkpoint when a 41-year-old man was caught speeding down the freight lane without his headlights on, and he also had a rifle in the back of his vehicle.
Thank you, Louise. That is Louise Tenuth joining us live from Mission Bay in Auckland. The government wants to introduce tougher safety rules for adventure activity operators in response to the deadly 2019 Whakaari eruption. 47 people, most of them tourists, were on the island when it erupted, and 22 were killed while others were seriously injured. Our reporter Samantha G has the story.
When Whakaari erupted nearly 2 years ago, it claimed the lives of 47 people and changed the lives of many others. It also changed the adventure tourism landscape. Now the government's rolled out a series of proposals it hopes will keep adventure seekers safe. It wants to require operators and landowners to assess and manage the risk from things like rockfalls, water surges, flooding, eruptions and avalanches, which aren't part of the current regime. The Workplace and Safety Minister Michael Wood says they're key changes that need to happen.
Clearly natural hazards play a significant part, and some people will find that a little surprising that they weren't put in when the regime was set up in 2014, and that is one of the outcomes of this review, that they should be put explicitly in there.
The Minister wants to plug gaps in the adventure activities regulations with tougher rules to mitigate the risks posed by natural hazards.
People are only going to come and do these activities if they have a level of confidence that they're going to be safe and that there's an appropriate regulatory environment. So while there will always be costs involved in running a regulatory system that keeps people safe, I would say the costs of having an inadequate regulatory system will be greater.
The government's proposals will affect just over 300 organisations, both tourism businesses and recreation providers. Stuart Barclay runs Adrift Tongariro, a company taking people on guided tours through the Whanganui and Tongariro national parks. He says they are already doing much of what the proposal is asking them to do.
Every day we are, as I am today, looking at the mountains, wondering what the weather's going to do tomorrow for our group going up the mountains tomorrow. So yeah, we're mitigating all those natural hazards, weather, rockfall, sliding and volcanic activity.
Tourism Industry Chief Executive Chris Roberts says they do need to take a closer look at how those risks are managed. He says some operators could see them as an extra burden at a time when they're struggling to survive with the borders closed.
This will be, for them, seen as another unwanted task that they have to undertake, but I think there will generally be a realisation that we want to keep our customers safe. That's the ultimate goal.
University of Auckland volcanologist Shane Cronin says there's a missing piece of the puzzle. That's how operators and landowners will measure risk.
Risk is not a static thing. It changes all the time. Situations change, weather changes, natural environments change. And so that's a really hard question, and it's a science question.
He says more effort needs to be put into developing tools for natural hazard risk evaluation. Having regulations is one thing, but there needs to be assistance to help operators fulfil those obligations and not palm them off.
Heading out for a jog this weekend? Well, spare a thought for Nick Ashall, because by the time you roll out of bed, he'll probably have been running for 24 hours straight. Why? Well, the Vic University marketing professor and ultra-marathon runner is raising money for the Asthma and Respiratory Foundation as part of Breathe Better September. Pretty impressive for a man severely injured in a hit and run in the US 4 years ago. He rolled out at 9 this morning, running a 6k loop, and won't finish up until 9 a.m. tomorrow. Now, we caught up with Nick during one of his precious food stops.
Broccoli and stew, and I'm just downing rather quickly a shake as well. So, yeah, it looks fantastic, and it will be in a couple of minutes.
So how are you feeling? I mean, you've been going for, several hours already.
Yeah, I've been started at 9 and had a quick break at 12, and I think I've just turned about 55, 56k, something like that. So I'm on target with what I wanted to achieve at this stage. So that's really good.
And so, what sort of pace are you setting yourself?
Well, it started off at around 9k an hour. It has slowed this afternoon. It's quite a warm day here in Wellington, so pretty slow down to about 8.5. And the wind's picked up a little bit, but it's dry and it's beautiful. Wellington's really put it on for me, so I'm very grateful.
So going at that kind of pace, you're going to, clear a couple of 100 Ks?
I'd like to, if I can. Well, I know it's going to slow down probably around midnight. That midnight sort of 4-5 a.m. Stage, it will slow me down. But if I can head around at 180, I'd be very pleased with the stops that I have scheduled within the 24-hour period. That would be a real achievement. But let's hope the body is able to do it.
You are running through the dead of the night, obviously. You got any buddies who are going to be keeping you company?
I do. I've got people. My daughter's on her bike following me, which is awesome. The last hour and a half, for the next couple of hours, I've got a couple of other runners joining around 7:30, and I've got another runner who's the sponsorship manager from the Respiratory and Asthma Foundation, who's joining me at 3 o'clock to do the last 6 hours. So yeah, I've had plenty of people, and I had one great guy around Oriental Parade probably in his mid-70s, said me on the radio a couple of days ago and joined me for UK. And that was really special.
So everybody's going to wonder, why are you putting yourself through this?
Well, I think it's a great idea, and all of the other people who are part of the Better Breathe September campaign through the Asthma Foundation. There are many people that are raising money for an extremely good cause, given the high rates of asthma among adults and children here in New Zealand. A staggering 700,000 people live with asthma, so it's a great initiative, and hopefully I can make a contribution every year.
It's pretty amazing for a guy who wasn't necessarily expected to walk again after suffering, significant injuries in a hit and run. Here you are.
Well, it's amazing. It's amazing what strong titanium does in your body. So, it has been a long journey. There's been some great times and some really dark times for that. But the human body is an incredible thing, and I've learned a lot about resilience. So, I just one foot in front of the other, and if you do that, you'll keep on going.
Yeah, well, I know you love running, and you obviously are resilient, but at what point do you reckon you're going to arrive at the House of Pain in this?
House of Pain, probably around midnight. But then there's some wonderful bars along Courtney Place I could stop into. I'm only joking, but yeah, probably around 11, 12, something like that.
And where do you go to in your head when you hit that wall?
Yeah, that's a good question. Do you know, I go into a big void, and I lose total awareness of what is going on around me, and it's a really, really lovely space to be in. That's where I go.
Hey, just one other thing. Did you cut your toenails before you headed off this morning?
A couple of days ago I did, but on runs like this, I'll probably lose maybe 2 or 3. I'll let you know in a few days.
And that is marathon man Nick Asherall. Kia ora e te iwi e haere ake nei I a checkpoint. Is Taris International Airport closer to takeoff? The squeeze on MIQ sees a Waikato company send workers offshore indefinitely. And the Australian retailer that wants to ban unvaccinated customers from malls. Homai o whakaaro, we love your feedback on anything on the program this evening. Do get in touch. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at checkpointrnz or email checkpoints@rnz.co.nz. Ko Sarah anō tēnei.
Kia ora, Lisa. RNZ News headlines. Ko Sarah Thompson tōku ingoa. The man charged with murdering and sexually violating a young woman in Auckland this week has entered no plea and will remain in custody. Lena Zhang Harap was found dead amongst trees near Owairaka, Mount Albert on Wednesday afternoon after failing to return from her regular morning walk. The search for a King Country family missing for 12 days has been suspended. 34-year-old Thomas Phillips and the children aged between 5 and 8 were last seen on September 11th. Inspector Will Lochran says, however, the investigation into their disappearance is ongoing. 2 epidemiologists say Auckland MIQ beds need to be reserved for those arriving from the most low-risk locations. Of the country's 31 MIQ facilities, 9 are in Auckland's centre. Mayor Phil Goff told Checkpoint he wants isolation hotels out of his downtown for good, replaced by purpose-built facilities on city fringe or surplus land close to Auckland Airport. Otago University Professor Nick Wilson says Auckland's MIQs should be reserved for double-vaccinated arrivals, and his colleague, Professor Michael Baker, says there needs to be changes in where high-risk returnees are placed. Meanwhile, Auckland is entering its first weekend of level 3 in the latest lockdown with a plea to keep up the good work. 9 cases were recorded today. Mayor Phil Goff says people need to remember COVID is still in the community and Auckland needs to remain vigilant. A targeted effort to vaccinate the Samoan community in Auckland this weekend is underway. The newly named mobile clinic Bosifica Vax was unveiled in Mangere this morning. It expects to vaccinate about 3,000 people over the next 3 days. And finally, North Korea is cool on South Korea's proposal to finally end the Korean War. It says turning the 1953 ceasefire into a formal end would not end what it calls a hostile United States policy towards it. Those Those are your headlines. Our next news and sport update is at 6.
Nā mihi Sarah, no mai, hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Ko taku hoa in Naianei, ko Nona Peltier, who's here to talk business. Let's start with the pace of growth, Nona, in buy now, pay later schemes, right? So it's outpacing credit cards. What are the implications of that?
Yeah, so credit cards are typically issued by banks, as most people know, and it seems that growth has been outstripped by the growth in the buy now, pay later services. Now, we would have heard back in March how the number of these types of payments systems are like twice what they were. Actually, they grew about by half in the March quarter over the same time a year earlier. Now, that was a few months ago. Now, in the June quarter, we're seeing the same thing. And so the banks were going to have to probably have a look at this. One of the head of banking at KPMG, John Kensington, says retail banks are going to have to adapt to the new reality if they want to continue to play the game. So there you go. It looks like we're going to see some banks into the buy now, pay later. But let's not worry about that, because at the same time, the government is likely to bring in more regulation to cover that, because right now, those types of schemes are somewhat exempt from the rules covering regular credit.
Right, okay. What about confidence in the labour market? Now, this is interesting. It continues to climb despite the latest round of COVID-19 lockdowns disrupting the economic activity. So what does the survey tell us?
Well, people are feeling very confident about their outlook in the workforce. So it's not surprising, I guess. The index rose 1.8 points into the September quarter to 105.7. Now, that's above levels we saw prior to COVID. So it says that basically people are feeling very positive about the labour market. And well, it's not a surprise, I suppose, that the public service feels a bit more confident than even the private sector. There was, although it was a bit mixed in the regions, some of the regions were reporting a decline in confidence, but others were stronger. And the Westpac Bank, who did this report, suggests that what this indicates is that the unemployment rate is likely to fall below 4% in the coming quarters. And that's really unsustainably low in terms of what the Reserve Bank will be thinking. And so, again, more reason to see some changes there on the horizon.
And Nona, what numbers have you got for us too?
Yeah, well, our index fell about 1/3% today. That's a 46-point drop to 13,260. That's not too surprising, because there is an increased worry now that property development firm we talked about earlier in the week, China Evergrande, looks like they're likely to default on their interest payments. There's a mountain of debt there to upset the world markets. We're talking that this company owes $305 billion likely to run short, and that could reverberate around the world. So the New Zealand dollar, though, it held on to its overnight gains, and 70.7 US cents, 96.9 Australian, and 51.5 pence.
Thanks, Nona. Nona Peltier with Business. A Waikato company has been forced to relocate staff overseas indefinitely because of the squeeze on MIQ. Last night on Checkpoint, the boss of Orion Health appealed to the government to set up a separate managed isolation system for businesses that could pay bonds for vaccinated staff to isolate at home with daily rapid testing and other reporting restrictions. Now, the government is planning to run a home isolation trial by the end of the year, but for some businesses, that is too late. Manta 5, a Hamilton-based hydrofoil bike company, has already sent several staff to Europe with no guarantee of a return date because of the uncertainty around MIQ spots. Well, joining me now is Manta 5 Chief Executive Mark Robotham. Mark, how are you doing?
Great, thanks.
So, how did you reach this decision to, invite some staff, if you like, to relocate offshore?
Well, look, we're faced by the global economy and the supply chain held-ups that's been troubling the rest of the world. We manufacture bikes out of Asia. We were trying to sell into the summer season for for Europe, and time was ticking out. We were going to, if we don't sell bikes, I always tell the guys we make bikes and sell bikes, and when we're not selling bikes, we don't exist as a company. So we just had to make that move to get people on the plane, and lucky enough, we had 4 staff willing to take up the cause.
Yeah, so where have they gone and well, how long could they conceivably be offshore?
So we've got 4 staff. They're all in Europe. They've been tripping around Europe, dealing with how Europe copes with COVID, with regular COVID tests, jumping nations, meeting customers. We've been lucky. 2 of them actually have been working very closely with New Zealand Trade and Enterprise, and looks like we've secured a slot home for them. But the other 2 are lucky enough to be young and willing to stay on a bit longer. But yes, we joke around the office that they won't be home for Christmas, and they're all going to be having Christmas together. But yeah, they are basically passionate and committed to the cause of making our company a success. We can't wait on the government to fix things up back here in New Zealand. We've just sort of got to get on and make it happen.
So when you say 2 of them may well have got spots through New Zealand Trade and Enterprise, have you applied for a business exemption of some sort to get into MIQ?
Yes, we were. New Zealand Trade and Enterprise have always been supportive of our company, and post-COVID, they've really stepped up to the mark, helping us out. In the early days, they even had people standing on trade show stands for us. They've helped us recruit staff overseas. You know, we've had to make and adapt our business to how we work in this new post-COVID economy. And yeah, the days of jumping on a plane and flitting over to Europe for a couple of days and then coming back are long gone. And so, yeah, and Trade and Enterprise, look, I'm really impressed with what they're doing to try and champion and be good advocates for the business community.
So why is it so vital to have this face-to-face contact? Because, some people listening will say, hey, you've got Zoom and all that techno stuff that you can use to keep in contact with people. Why do you need bodies on the ground? Explain that.
I think you made the key point, to keep in contact with people, and that's generally people that you've got an existing relationship with. If you're like us, we've got on a big mission to create a new sport called hydrocycling. It's something new. The world hasn't seen it before. We're living at the other end of the planet. People aren't going to trust you straight up when you say, hey, look, buy a container load of these fantastic hydrofoil bikes. They want to meet you face to face. They want to see where you're at. We've also suffered big delays through production in Asia, and there's been issues to deal with logistics and moving stock around the world. So they like us to front up and actually say, look, we're actually real. We stand behind our product. We mean to do business. You can't do that behind a Zoom call, and particularly when you're starting out on a relationship.
So what are people overseas saying to you about New Zealand and whether it's open for business or not?
The standing joke is when they say with Kiwis, they say, oh, you guys, when you go home, you've got to go to jail and you've got to pay for it. So look, it has become... I think early on New Zealand stood out as being the champions of really in control of COVID, doing the great thing. Look, we're not arguing against doing isolation and MIQ. We just need a more predictable way of managing it so that we can plan around it. It's one thing to send a staff member off to the other side of the world and say, I don't know when you're coming home. Even if we said, look, we had a slot in 6 months' time, at least we can plan around it. We can get the human wellness thing right. We can get people's expectations right. We can work around that.
So how could you conceive of that working then if you have to present, let's say you had an opportunity to present a proposal to the government to say, this is how you can make it easier for us. We accept we need to isolate, but here's what we'd like. What would that look like, Mark?
I think it would be home isolation. It would have a heavy bond with it. Would stand behind, as companies, we'd stand behind our staff to actually self-isolate and do the right thing. That would be a lot easier for all of us.
Have you expressed any interest in the government trial that is potentially coming up?
Yes, definitely, yes.
Yeah, and what about the MIQ lobby that's open again next week? Are you going to be crowded in there with the other thousands?
Yes, I think that was just boosting the bubble of hope for a lot of people, because I think early on they just knew that it was impossible to get a seat. They didn't realise they were sitting behind 30,000 other people. So, look, we will continue to work with Trade and Enterprise, continue to do our own thing around getting MIQ slots through the voucher system. We will just work around it. For us, growing our business is too important. We'll just make it happen.
Appreciate your time this evening. That's Mark Robotham, who's from Manta 5. And as mentioned, it's a hydrofoil bike company which is based in Hamilton, and they have sent some staff offshore indefinitely. It is 13 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen, and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. He muriaki ina pitapita kōrero. After the news at 6, the wage subsidy bill for this latest lockdown hits $2.5 billion. Christchurch Airport has today released analysis showing Terrace, a small Centro Otago farming settlement, can support an international airport. The airport, which is owned by Christchurch City Council and the Crown, bought 750 hectares of farmland in the area last year. But as Timothy Brown reports, the findings don't mean the proposal is ready for takeoff yet.
The 42-page preliminary aeronautical assessment contains a lot of information. But the key thing is this. The farmland terrace, owned by Christchurch Airport, can support at least a 2.2 kilometre runway, which would allow wide-body aircraft from all over New Zealand, as well as Australia and the Pacific, to touch down in the small town. Terrace is home to just over 200 people, but it's only 30 kilometres from nearby Cromwell and Wanaka, and 90 kilometres from Queenstown, as well as the southern gateway to the Lindis Pass. Project Director Michael Singleton says no decision accompanies today's report, and it'll still be years before an airport would be operational.
We've said we don't believe an airport could be constructed there properly before, 2030. Nothing in this changes it. These are just waypoints along the way. So those original timeframes that we've talked about remain the same.
He says it's likely Christchurch Airport will be in a position to make a decision in the next 15 months.
2023 is a date, and none of these dates are fixed. That's an indicative date that we think would have given us time to do a lot of the validation and planning work in that first phase, and then to make a decision about whether you're pushing this through the approvals phase.
Mr Singleton says the aeronautical assessment also shows there's a possibility of the runway being up to 3 kilometres long, which would open up more possible routes.
First of all, we're very early days, so conversations around that start being reasonably premature until we've done the work. But at that, you are talking about longer range flying beyond East Coast Australia.
And those possibilities have caused consternation for some in the community. Sustainable Terrace Chair Chris Goddard says the assessment is still light on the details, which the community really wants to know.
The proposal remains silent on the business case, so it does mention further afield than the east coast of Australia, but it doesn't say where the tourists that they're pulling are coming from, whether they're replacing the Queenstown and Wanaka airports, moving traffic from Christchurch, or leaning in heavily to bulk tourism.
He says his concern for the proposal is as high today as when news of it leaked in July last year. Chris Goddard says there are environmental concerns as well, such as if the runway was aligned with Lake Dunstan.
It covers some very pristine river frontage and lakefront, and the bird life there is quite spectacular. We also know that bird life in airports don't coexist.
Among those opposed to the plan is Queenstown Lake's Mayor Jim Bolt, himself a former chief executive of Christchurch Airport.
I am surprised and dismayed that anyone would continue to promote the idea of flying wide-body jets into our part of the world when our community has made it perfectly clear that they don't want that.
A survey by the Wanaka Stakeholders Group, which opposes development of nearby Wanaka Airport, found almost 3/4 of the Upper Clutha oppose the plan. Sustainable Terrace is carrying out a census of local opinion and is expecting similar findings. But not all locals are against it. Fourth-generation farmer Johnny Trevathan says he wants to hear all the facts before he makes up his mind. But he believes too many in the community are opposed to an idea that could generate jobs and growth for the town because they don't want an airport in their backyard.
If my father and several other local residents around here were like that 20 years ago, we wouldn't see vineyards, and we wouldn't hear wind machines at night frostbiting, and we wouldn't see cherries, and some of us wouldn't see irrigation either.
Johnny Trevathan says Terrace School had 4 times the number of students when his father attended, and he wants to see that again. Central Otago Mayor Tim Cadogan says he remains neutral on the proposal, but he's watching the developments with interest.
The Silver Ferns face a mammoth task to hold on to the Tiny Jamison Trophy when they take on England in the deciding test in Christchurch tonight. The Ferns confirmed this afternoon that injury has ruled out both their captain and vice-captain from the must-win clash. After taking the first test by 6, the Roses beat the Ferns by 10 2 nights ago and will fancy their chances again against a depleted New Zealand side. Sports reporter Bridget Tunnicliffe is in Christchurch. Bridget, so the captain and the vice-captain both out. Where does that leave the Silver Ferns?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? We thought they might be excluded because of the COVID travel restrictions, but injury has got them in the end. Jenna Crampton, she missed out on Test 2 as well. She had an adductor strain, and that really affected the Silver Ferns' performance in Test 2. Now, Suli Fitzpatrick, the vice-captain, she has been ruled out because of a knee injury she sustained yesterday during training. And just to add to New Zealand's troubles, a goal attack, Tiana Maturo, who's been having a brilliant debut series, has also been ruled out. She picked up a strain during the second test on Wednesday. So Sam Winders has come in she'll stand in as captain. She'll do a great job. Jamie Hume has been brought into the team of 12 today. She could get her test debut. You'll remember that the Silver Ferns brought in 3 development squad players last week when they thought they might not get the exemptions for the 4 Auckland-based players. So they'll be very grateful that they did that because 2 of those players have been brought in tonight, Kimi Poi and Georgia Tong. Georgia Tong, she's probably pinching herself right now. She wouldn't have been expecting it.
So what about other opportunities? What about Grace Weke?
Yeah, she's been named in the 12 tonight. I do hope she gets on court. Obviously, she was a bit tentative in her debut on Wednesday, but I think it's understandable. I think she's ready. She shot 205 more goals during the ANZ Premiership than any other shooter, so she's ready. She's obviously just going to be a little bit nervous. But she needs to get this court time now. I think she could be a key player for the Silver Ferns at the Commonwealth Games next year. So they need to get her on court. If not now, when?
So, Bridget, is it wrong to say that it seems like a bit of a big ask? I mean, can the Silver Ferns do it?
It is a big ask. I mean, you've lost your captain and your vice-captain. I do think maybe it just does take a bit of pressure off now, though, because the expectations will have shifted. So maybe they play with a bit more freedom. Normally when you bring on rookies, they're surrounded by a spine of players who are really experienced. This hasn't happened this time. We are really light on test caps, so it's going to take a really big effort. But, anything's possible on the side. I think the pressure kind of comes off now. It'll take a pretty special effort. I think the series has reminded us how dangerous England will be at the Commonwealth Games next year. They're actually missing 3 or 4 key players, and look how good they've been. So this is really important preparation for the Silver Ferns.
Good to talk to you, Bridget. That's Bridget Tunnicliffe, who's joining us live from Christchurch. Silver Ferns versus the England Roses. And, a couple of challenges there, as Bridget pointed out. Debate is raging in Australia over how to police vaccine passports at shopping malls. As New South Wales, Victoria and ACT edge closer to ending lockdowns, retailers are trying to figure out how to deal with customers. The head of one of Australia's largest retailers wants unvaccinated customers to be banned from shopping centres, with checks on the vaccination status and temperatures of shoppers at the store's entrance. But others say that idea has plenty of legal and practical problems. The ABC's Alexia Atwood reports.
Social media influencers are key to driving sales for big retailers.
So guys, here in Australia, it's nearly school time. We're doing some back-to-school shopping and we're going to be doing it in Smiggle.
The stationery store Smiggle is owned by Premier Investments, one of Australia's largest retailers, with almost 900 stores across 7 brands. Its chairman is Solomon Liu. And as the end of lockdown looms, he's got some thoughts on how to reopen the retail sector.
So it's really for government to get together with the mall owners
and say, listen here, fellas, this is how it's going to work, right? You know, people have to be vaccinated and people have to be temperature checked. Once they're in the mall and they're checked at the point of entry, then there's no issue for the store, you know, because otherwise every store is going to have marshals out the front checking, taking temperature checks, putting them into a queue, you know, and it's going to be very inconvenient.
But putting the onus on the owner of the shopping centre rather than the individual store to check vaccination passports doesn't seem to be too popular. Dominique Lamb is the CEO of the National Retail Association.
In order for a shopping centre to put people at their entries and to look at the passports and then decline them from entering would have them in breach of all of their legal obligations to their retailers.
And what if an unvaccinated person needs to get inside a shopping centre to do their groceries?
So how would you, as a centre, stand at the entry or the myriad of entries, because we're talking hundreds of entry points within a shopping centre, and then police who could and couldn't come in? I mean, the reality is, even when you talk about security guards, for instance, in shopping centres, they can only ask people to leave.
The alternative is asking shoppers to check in everywhere as they move from store to store. And that's the plan the New South Wales government is working towards, according to the CEO of the Australian Retailers Association, Paul Zara.
Certainly it won't be seamless. It's an extra hurdle, but I've confidence in the sector managing through this. We think it's a small price to pay to get the shops reopened.
But what about all the staff?
Now that puts, you know, the frontline team under some pressure, so we're concerned about elevated levels of customer aggression. So we're obviously asking the New South Wales government to support the industry through extra policing and other law compliance checks.
It's an issue that worries Dominique Lamb too.
You know, you've seen the footage of what's happening in Victoria at this point in time. To put something like this in place and to put the onus on the retailer to have to ask those questions, you know, is very concerning to us.
It's why retailers and customers will be keenly waiting for the New South Wales, Victorian and ACT governments to clarify how stores and shopping centres should deal with vaccinated and non-vaccinated customers.
Let's get into your feedback on MIQ facilities, and this is the suggestion that, well, Auckland CBD MIQ should be only for very low-risk returnees, or they should get rid of MIQ in downtown altogether. And this listener says, why not have MIQ at the airport? A room with a view of planes landing would make time fly. Very good. Paul reckons we have huge empty hotels in places like Milford Sound and Te Anau, perfect for quarantine. I wonder what Milford Sound and Te Anau think of that. Another listener says, I'm currently day 8 quarantine in a CBD hotel. I've been double jabbed for a while, had a pre-departure test, 2 subsequent tests here in MIQ, all negative. Why on earth can't I now isolate at home for the second week? I have more chance of catching COVID, they say, staying in the hotel than I would if I isolated at home, and it would free up MIQ spaces.
Ahiahi Marie, RNZ News at 6, ko Sarah Thompson tōko ingoa. Zespri has launched emergency management plans after a sample of its kiwi fruit tested positive for COVID-19 in China. In a statement, the company says test results for all fruit under investigation have since come back negative. It says the matter has been taken extremely seriously and Zespri is cooperating with all relative agencies to trace the product shipment. Zespri says the affected fruit came from Bay of Plenty and was packed in May before it was shipped from Tauranga in August. It says to date there have been no reported cases of COVID-19 in orchards or packhouses. The search for a King Country family missing for 12 days has been suspended. Thomas Phillips and his children Jada, Maverick and Ember, aged between 5 and 8, were last seen on September 11th. Intensive land and sea searches around King Country's rugged west coast have failed to find any sign of them. Andrew McRae reports.
Police say they've spoken with the extended family to discuss what will happen now. Inspector Will Loughran says the search will move from daily physical searches to a reactive phase, depending on any new information that comes to hand. He says the investigation into their disappearance will continue. Police are keen for people who find any items of interest along the coastline from Papanui Point near Raglan to as far south as Waikawa Beach to contact them.
The man charged with murdering and sexually violating a young woman in Auckland has been remanded in custody. Lena Zhang Harap was found dead among trees near Owairaka, Mount Albert on Wednesday afternoon after failing to return from her regular morning walk. A 31-year-old man was arrested in the early hours of this morning, sitting in his car in Papatoetoe, 20 kilometres away. He was granted interim name suppression in the Auckland District Court and will reappear in the High Court on October 13th. Two epidemiologists say Auckland MIQ beds need to be reserved for those arriving from the most low-risk locations. Of the country's 31 MIQ facilities, 9 are in Auckland's centre. The Mayor, Phil Goff, wants isolation hotels out of his downtown for good, replaced by purpose-built facilities on the city fringe or surplus land close to Auckland Airport. Otago University Professor Nick Wilson says Auckland MIQs should be reserved for double-vaccinated arrivals, and his colleague Professor Michael Baker says there needs to be changes in where high-risk returnees are placed. Just 9 new community cases of COVID-19 were recorded today, all in Tāmaki Makaurau, and the first time the daily total has been a single digit for weeks. The wage subsidies bill for the latest lockdowns has topped $2.5 billion, with 593,000 businesses receiving money. Young people, including 16 to 17-year-olds, make up the highest proportion of recipients. Infometrics economist Brad Olsen says there's a clear focus on saving those jobs.
A lot of that is because our businesses who might otherwise be looking to get rid of their young workers in these times of uncertainty and with no income coming in the door, those jobs are ones that the government is looking to specifically prop up and businesses are looking to specifically try and save.
Brad Olsen says overall far fewer businesses have applied for the wage subsidy compared to last year. Pharmacy charges for the emergency contraceptive pill have been wiped nearly 3,000 times in 2 years under a Northland pilot program. It normally costs $40 to $50 at pharmacies. Sam Ollie reports from Whangarei.
For the last 2 years, the Northland DHB has fully funded consultations and dispensing of the morning after pill at 3/4 of pharmacies. It is renewing the contracts for at least another year. The director of Kensington Pharmacy, Angela Heswell, is one of a group of Te Tai Tokerau pharmacists who pushed for the ECP funding. She says unwanted pregnancies are a tragedy. Ms Heswell would like to see the ECP provided at zero cost at pharmacies nationwide.
It's 4 minutes past 6. The Asthma and Respiratory Foundation hopes a 24-hour marathon runner will help people understand the seriousness of these diseases. Victoria University of Wellington Professor Nick Ashell is running 24 hours non-stop across the city to raise awareness for respiratory diseases. The foundation's chief executive, Letitia Harding, says while respiratory issues are common, it's a challenge for many people.
Asthma and respiratory diseases sort of get a little bit pushed to the wayside. It's almost seen as quite a common thing, and this is just a reminder by Nick doing this to say that actually, these are real issues that people have to live with and challenge themselves with.
Nick Ashell will finish his run tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Parts of the South Island and Wellington are in for a wet and blustery start to the weekend. Met Service has issued a severe weather warning. It's forecasting heavy rain and severe nor'west gales for Christchurch, including Arthur's Pass, Canterbury Plains and Marlborough. Nor'west gales are also expected in Wellington in the afternoon. Moving now into sports news, the All Black captain Ardie Savea says the Springboks are the most physical team in world rugby, and he's preparing for a bruising 100th test match between the two sides tomorrow night in Townsville. The All Blacks are favourites to win, with South Africa coming off 2 losses to the Wallabies, but Savea is adamant the Springboks will be at their best for the historic match.
The All Blacks against the Springboks is one of the most iconic test matches played in rugby, so I guess to be a part of that, it's pretty special, and the South Africans are very big physical men and they just want to dominate.
The All Blacks top the Rugby Championship standings, and South Africa must win this weekend to keep their slim title chances alive. The Silver Ferns are onto their third captain in as many games as injuries hit the squad ahead of tonight's clash with the England Roses. Captain Gina Crampton and Vice-Captain Sulu Fitzpatrick will miss the decider in the Tiny Jamison Trophy Series in Christchurch as they nurse abductor and knee injuries, respectively. Mid-quarter Sam Winders will take on the captaincy duties in the must-win game, which starts at 7:30. And finally, world number one John Rahm and Sergio Garcia will spearhead Europe's defence on day one of golf's Ryder Cup in Wisconsin. The Spanish duo have been paired together for tonight's opening foursomes and will face Americans Justin Thomas and Jordan Spieth. Rahm is the US Open champion, while Garcia is the record Ryder Cup point scorer. And that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Māori language advocate Nahiwi Apanui selects the mixtape. Country Life checks out the latest in electric farm bike technology and meets the social media savvy women reinventing market gardening. Holly Arrowsmith is our Friday Night Live act. Because we have just had the spring equinox, we've got a sonic tonic that's straight down the middle on Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Te reo irirangi o Aotearoa, on air, online and on demand. Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Horoe Saturday. Northland to Manawatu, including Coromandel and the Central High Country. Fine and cloudy periods with rain about Taranaki tomorrow night. Bay of Plenty and Gisborne to Wairarapa, fine. Horowhenua to Wellington, also Nelson and Marlborough, fine tonight with cloud increasing tomorrow with evening rain. Canterbury, excluding the High Country, and North Otago and Dunedin will be fine tonight with scattered showers tomorrow with severe nor'west gales in exposed places. Bulla, Westland, Fiordland and the Canterbury High Country will see scattered showers, turning to rain in Fiordland this evening and elsewhere tomorrow. Heavy with possible thunderstorms easing tomorrow evening. Severe nor'west gales about the High Country tomorrow. Southland, Clutha and Central Otago will see fine spells and isolated showers tonight. Rain tomorrow with severe nor'west gales in exposed places. Rain turning to showers tomorrow afternoon and winds easing. And for the Chatham Islands, fine spells with drizzle developing tomorrow afternoon. That concludes the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Horoe Saturday. It's 8 minutes past 6.
Kia ora rā e ho, no mai, hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Aucklanders are hoping their days in level 3 lockdown are numbered after just 9 new COVID-19 infections were recorded today. It is the lowest number in 37 days since 7 cases were recorded on August 18, the day after the entire country went into a level 4 lockdown. On that day, we were hearing a Devonport man's work colleague had tested positive, along with the workmate's 3 flatmates, plus 2 of the flat's friends. Since then, the number of cases have swelled to more than 1,000, showing just how quickly the virus can spread and what a long tail the Delta variant has. It all comes as the wage subsidy bill for the latest lockdown reaches $2.5 billion. The support has been a lifeline for thousands of businesses, but as the struggle to operate continues, some say the government messages to hang in there are wearing a bit thin. Nita Blake-Person reports.
Another week and another big COVID bill.
As of this morning, 593,262 applications for the wage subsidy have been approved, totalling more than $2.5 billion in payments.
Finance Minister Grant Robertson today updating the cost of the wage subsidy scheme, which has supported nearly 600,000 businesses during the Delta outbreak. Christine Parkinson's Matakana beauty salon is among those affected. She can't open under level 3 and she says things feel tougher this lockdown than they did last year.
All the tax that I need to pay and the government loan from last lockdown that still needs to be paid back. You know, having had my end of year accounts done by my accountant for the last year, you know, we're $20,000 or $30,000 down from last year with the lockdown. So, you know, it's really difficult.
She says it feels like 1 step forward and 2 steps back for the business at the moment, but she's grateful to have her rent on hold and for the government support. But times are tough, and she says communication from politicians can be frustrating.
I find it quite hard to watch. In fact, I don't watch a lot of their announcements because it sometimes feels condescending because they're on full pay. telling us to be kind and patient and this will end, and they're not taking a drop in anything.
While it's tough times, she is battling and says some businesses which have no way of operating until lower alert levels are doing it particularly hard.
I think there should possibly be more, individual cases, maybe looking at different industries a bit closer and seeing who is more vulnerable.
But Infometrics economist Brad Olsen isn't convinced.
I think we should be very, very wary about sector-specific initiatives. They do get into the position where the government will be picking winners or losers and creating winners and losers across the economy by who they do or don't support. If the focus is trying to ensure that businesses who are in a compromised position get the support that they need, then having revenue targets like we've got with the wage subsidy remains not only the most efficient but also the most effective way to support New Zealand workers.
Latest stats from the Ministry for Social Development show 41% of all jobs have been supported by the latest wage subsidies. The figures through to September 17th reveal Northland has the highest proportion of jobs supported, followed by Auckland. The construction and accommodation and food services industries are receiving the most help. Young people, including 16 to 17-year-olds, make up the highest proportion of recipients, receiving 65% of the support. Brad Olsen says there's a clear focus on younger workers.
A lot of that is because our businesses who might otherwise be looking to get rid of their young workers in these times of uncertainty and with no income coming in the door, those jobs are ones that the government is looking to specifically prop up, and businesses are looking to specifically try and save with the wage subsidy, because the counterfactual is that those young people would be in the sort of position where they might not have a job to come back to.
Overall, he says there are far fewer businesses applying for the wage subsidy this time around.
A lot of businesses have built up more resilience about how to operate through the alert levels, and also there is more confidence around the bounce back that the economy has started to experience. That's meant that not as many businesses have needed to take up that support.
While just over 1 million jobs were supported in the first round of wage subsidies from this Delta outbreak, that dropped to 670,000 in the second round and just 78,000 so far in the third and latest round.
And in breaking news, the Kaikoui police are appealing for information in relation to a violent incident. They say that there was an altercation in Kaikoui on Thursday night, and police are aware that this incident may have been recorded by onlookers and are seeking their assistance as part of the investigation. So basically they're looking for any recordings that people may have made or photos taken. At around 8:18 p.m, a violent disorder is broken out on Mangakahia Road, they say, in Kaikoui. The number of people were reported fighting with weapons, not firearms, but other weapons, which lasted for several minutes. And during the altercation, a vehicle has collided with people at the scene, knocking at least 2 people onto the ground. And one of those knocked over, a teenage boy, has also been stabbed, they say. And he has undergone surgery and is now in a stable condition in hospital. But they'd like to hear from people who may have video or photos of this particular incident in Kaikoui on Thursday night around 8:18 on Mangakahia Road. They'd like you to get in touch, and we could put a link to the place where you can upload the videos onto our website, so keep your eye out for that one. Cook Islands tourism industry is facing a blow from New Zealand's outbreak. It's been 5.5 weeks since Aotearoa went into lockdown, and most Kiwi visitors who planned to wait it out have now returned from the Cook Islands. Now, Cook Island businesses are relying on government grants to stay afloat as the tourism industry faces an uncertain future. RNZ Pacific's Alicia Foon has the story.
Eerily quiet restaurants and empty hotel rooms is the reality for the Cook Islands. The nation of at least 15,000 people survives off tourism. During Aotearoa's winter this year, Rarotonga was thriving off 3,000 New Zealand visitors a week. But that came to a sudden stop. Cook Islands President of the Tourism Council and hotel owner Liana Scott says they've been left in the dark since the bubble popped and the tourism tap shut off.
A huge amount of our tourism makes up our economy's success. It's actually really tough, but it seems tougher this time than last time. Pretty diabolical, and it's quite a scary unknown future here in the Cooks for businesses.
She says the Cook Island government hasn't provided as much financial support to businesses compared to last year.
65% of our GDP relies on tourism. This is direct. There is only so many other ways we can pivot our business. I mean, we are Cook Islanders, we live here, we breathe here. We don't want the island to be necessarily going into more debt than it can handle.
Island Hotel's chief executive Andrew Whittaker is eager to get Kiwis back on the island.
We need to get some business back as soon as possible and tourists back. I mean, so we're the largest resort on the island, and currently have nobody staying in either resort. It's very important for the economy that the bubble does open up. I think a lot of businesses are feeling the pinch worse this time around.
The Cook Islands Chamber of Commerce is asking the government to allow direct flights for vaccinated tourists from Christchurch if some regions get to alert level 1. Despite 96% of Cook Islands' eligible population being fully vaccinated, the government is taking a slow and cautious approach. Chamber of Commerce Chair Fletcher Melvin says he's hopeful to see departure flights from New Zealand's South Island.
Why are we not opening up to Christchurch? You know, we could have a flight from Christchurch. We are really hopeful that the government has been looking at these options, negotiating with the New Zealand government, negotiating with Air New Zealand.
Linda Scott says creative ideas are being put forward to keep people on the island.
The possibility of welcoming long-stay guests. So these are perhaps retirees or people that work remotely in New Zealand who are able to come to the Cook Islands for 6 months or a year and spend time either relaxing here, holidaying, or doing some work in the Cook Islands.
In the meantime, Mr Melvin fears hundreds of locals and migrant workers plan to leave Rarotonga in exchange for promising job prospects in New Zealand.
What we've seen is that there are companies in New Zealand poaching directly now that have been very, very active within the Cook Islands trying to get workers. And we've been told that up to 100 migrant workers are leaving for New Zealand.
He says it's another reason why a date to get tourists back in the Cooks is paramount.
It is 18 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The government's been handed a good report card for its work in the mental health system, but has been criticised by the opposition for reviewing itself. The implementation unit is housed in the Prime Minister's own department and was set up to monitor the government's delivery on a small number of critical projects. Our political reporter Annika Smith has more.
Nearly 5 months after it was first set up, the government's implementation unit has released its first report card. Asked to look at delivery on Budget 2019's $1.9 billion mental health package, it found strong progress has been made. Deputy Prime Minister Grant Robertson, whom the unit reports to, says the report made some interesting observations.
The first of those being that actually a number of very good things have happened as a result of the mental health package, and that there has been an increase in services to a range of New Zealanders. It also highlighted some areas where further work is needed.
The review focused on the delivery of the output, what might be holding this back, and whether appropriate governance, planning and reporting mechanisms are in place. Recruitment, reporting and infrastructure were key areas for improvement, but the delivered or good work lists were much longer. Among this was progress made on integrated primary mental health and addiction services in GP clinics, with more than 200 GPs now housing a mental health specialist on site. But National's mental health spokesperson, Matt Ducey, isn't impressed.
That's only 15% of GP practices. That means 85% of GP practices still don't have mental health professionals in their practices.
Mr Ducey says if this is success, the government has set itself a very low bar. But Health Minister Andrew Little says Mr Ducey's calculations don't add up, a more accurate reflection being the population reached by these services, not the number of GP practices covered.
Yeah, Matt's not very good with numbers. It's not the proportion of GP practices, it's the proportion of the enrolled patient population, and that's roughly 1.4 million, I think.
Matt Ducey's criticisms don't stop at the numbers, though. He says the fact the government is reviewing itself on mental health delivery is an absolute sham.
To come out today and say they're making strong progress and mental health initiatives are on track is a kick in the guts to many New Zealanders who are stuck in waiting lists that have grown over the last 4 years to get the vital mental health services that they need.
Grant Robertson disagrees and says it's a useful report.
We've put it out there. It's not all entirely positive, the report. There were shortcomings and issues that needed to be dealt with. So I think it's a good and frank report, and I'm not aware that Mr Ducey's party ever exposed themselves to such matters as well.
Today's review comes hot on the heels of the announcement of Kia Manawa Nui, the government's 10-year strategy for the mental health system.
The emergency contraceptive pill or morning after pill normally comes at a cost of $40 to $50 at New Zealand pharmacies, but across Northland it is free. For the last 2 years, the DHB has fully funded consultations and dispensing of the ECP at 3/4 of pharmacies to reduce unwanted pregnancies. The contracts are now being renewed for at least another year. And as Sam Ollie reports, pharmacists hope the initiative can go nationwide.
In most parts of the country, the only place you can get the emergency contraceptive pill at zero cost is at family planning. That's different in Northland, and it's bringing widespread relief.
Because it'll make people do it rather than putting it off.
It fixes a lot of unwanted youth pregnancies and stuff like that. Yeah,
and I think a lot of the youth or women in those situations will feel comfortable because that is quite expensive though.
Yeah. I had to get it once when I was younger and I was shocked by the price. I'm like, how do you expect a young person like that to be able to afford that?
Yeah, I think I only had to use it once when it was probably 20 years ago. But yeah, when I had to pay for it, I was like, oh, yeah, make sure I don't have to use that again.
No, I think it's probably just fair that anyone can access it. I mean, something like that's pretty expensive. Not everyone can afford $40 or $50.
The ECP has been given out for free nearly 3,000 times at Te Tai Tokerau pharmacies since the DHB decided to cover costs. But the DHB's primary care funding manager Beth Harvey says there is more to it than just handing the pill over the counter.
The service includes a consultation with the patient by a pharmacist, discussion on alternative contraception options and referral to other services where appropriate.
Life Pharmacy Oars is open 6 days a week in the centre of Whangarei. Charge pharmacist Dave Lawney has seen the difference the emergency contraceptive funding is making.
On average, 4 or 5 a week. It is a well-utilised service. We also work very closely with family planning who are located in close proximity to our pharmacy. They have on-site services, but I believe they also refer people who they're unable to see immediately through to us.
Pharmacies are open up to 7 days a week across Northland and don't require appointments. They're often closer to home than a family planning or GP clinic and have longer opening hours. So for those needing immediate help to avoid pregnancy, a pharmacy is often the easiest place to go. Angela Heswell, Director of Kensington Pharmacy in Whangarei, was one of a group of Te Tai Tokerau pharmacists who pushed for the ECP funding. She says unwanted pregnancies are a tragedy. Instead of a DHB by DHB approach to the issue, Ms Heswell would like to see the morning after pill provided at no charge at pharmacies nationwide.
I think it's important to have consistent services and have people have the same opportunity throughout New Zealand.
New Zealand Pharmaceutical Society President Rhiannon Braund agrees.
This to me is one of the most obvious things that should be funded, so we should have no barriers. Whether you get an ECP on a Sunday morning, the only place you can go is the pharmacy, so you haven't got doctors that are open.
Pharmac says the ECP is already fully funded and the costs charged at pharmacies around the country are for consults and dispensing only.
Finally tonight, sometimes it all comes down to timing, right? That was certainly the case in the US state of Minnesota 10 days ago. Two mountain biking strangers just happened to be on the same trail when one of them took a heavy tumble off the track and down a ravine. Thankfully, one was a doctor and was able to save the other's life. And as Susan Elizabeth Littlefield reports, the rest is history.
The challenging trails of Cuyuna Lakes near Crosby are a therapeutic distraction for this Egan father and corrections officer.
It's a huge stress reliever. So just with the nature of my job.
It's a place where Jesse Conant, an ER doc in Hayward, Wisconsin, comes for post-work solace too.
Mountain biking is an activity that I enjoy, which is why I happen to be in that spot on that day.
And that spot is where two strangers' lives would tragically and beautifully intertwine. What are the chances?
Right. Yeah. I mean, what are the odds?
Not high at all. Todd, an experienced cyclist, took a violent fall near a ravine. He explains from his bed at HCMC.
I was starting to see white spots. I'm like, okay, this isn't cool. This isn't normal.
Even though Todd had just about the worst accident he could have had, turns out he had the best timing because of the biker who was down the trail behind him. Dr. Conant approached the hardworking medics who realized Todd was not breathing and death was looming. He joined in and tried a technique he'd only trained for, an impromptu tracheotomy.
That's an uncommon procedure. And when I had the scalpel in my hand, I was hesitant to do that because obviously cutting someone's neck, you're leaving a scar.
It worked. Todd was flown to HCMC. He doesn't remember the doctor, but he does realize his fortune.
I just want to meet the guy and it's responders. Just give him a big hug.
So when Todd, who has a traumatic brain injury, was released,
I have a surprise for you.
We made a virtual introduction.
This is Dr. Conant, who helped save your life.
Oh, okay.
Todd, nice to meet you.
Hey, you too. You too.
It's great to know that you're alive, to be honest. I was not optimistic about the outlook. So being able to sit here and talk with you today, only 10 days later, is really unbelievable.
Basically, I just want to tell the doctor on how grateful I am for everything he's done. I can send you the biggest virtual hug that is known to anybody. It's kind of like, when a kid gets a new teddy bear and he's holding the bear so tight. That's kind of what it feels like right now.
And just like that, a new friendship was made.
I've been right up there for several years now.
Between two bikers who somehow ended up on the same path.
Well, who knows? Maybe you guys could go for a ride one day.
Right. Yeah.
Pretty lucky, eh? A lot of you are getting in touch about MIQ and whether it should be moved out of the CBD in Auckland or only be used for very low-risk returnees. This person says, aren't we better to keep them in the city as it employs many people in many different ways? Richard in Invercargill says, MIQ in Terrace Airport. There is an empty military camp just outside Tekapo. Perfect for the summer and also handy for Terrace International Airport if this drags on for 5 years. Ever the optimist, aren't you, Richard? John says only low-risk travellers for downtown Auckland. Only low-risk travellers, full stop, should be allowed into New Zealand. New Zealand citizens or not, says John. Another person says the MIQ conversation would be so much more encouraging if it was dated September 2020, not September 2021. On vaccinations, this person reckons we should start a top town competition for vaccinations. We all love a competition, they reckon. Yeah, not far from the truth. Someone else, Richard, reckons there are thousands of idle cruise ships around the world. Why can't a few suitable ships be converted for MIQ use? That is an interesting one as well. That is all we've got time for tonight. The Late News team will keep you updated throughout the evening. Have a great weekend. See you Monday.
Kia ora tātou, RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Ko Sarah Thompson, tōko ingoa. Zespri has launched emergency management plans after a sample of its kiwi fruit tested positive for COVID-19 in China. Auckland's 9 cases today is the first single-digit tally in 37 days of the present outbreak. The man charged with murdering and sexually violating a young woman in Auckland, has been remanded in custody. Lena Zhang Harrop was found dead near Wairaka, Mount Albert, on Wednesday afternoon. And troubled Chinese property giant Evergrande has missed an interest payment on its $305 debt. Worrying global markets. There's probably $1 billion in there. I'll check it for you in our next news and weather at 7.
You keep up with the latest trends and all that, don't you?
Yeah, I try to.
So what's your favourite R&Z podcast?
Oh, not really my thing. I like sport.
They've got sport.
Oh, well, comedy, really.
They've got comedy.
Actually, business is more my...
Got that.
History.
Eons.
Cultural.